At the same time, the voices in favor of regime change, man, they just don't stop coming out of the woodwork left and right.
Does people not learn?
This is with regards to Cuba, where, of course, we've been covering, really rare and historic demonstrations that have been happening there. You've had a government crackdown cutting off the internet, so it's hard to figure out exactly what's going on the ground there. And, of course, none of this can be said without taking in the context also of the U.S. embargo, which makes life very difficult for the people of Cuba and has for now 60-plus years. But the minute that there are any protests on the ground in Cuba, you got people coming out of the woodwork ready to invade, literally calling the mayor of Miami, a Republican mayor of Miami, literally suggesting airstrikes and an intervention in Cuba right now on Fox News. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
And that country had peaceful democracy for decades, and you had interventions by democratic presidents, taking out Osama bin Laden in Pakistan. It's a sovereign country where they took out a terrorist that probably saved thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of lives, and President Clinton in Kosovo intervening in a humanitarian issue with airstrikes. So there have been many, many opportunities in the history.
Are you suggesting airstrikes in Cuba?
What I'm suggesting is that option is one that has to be explored and cannot be just simply discarded as an option that is not on the table. And there's a variety of ways the military can do it, but that's something that needs to be discussed and needs to be looked at as a potential option in addition to a variety of other options that can be discussed.
Yeah.
60 years after the Bay of Pigs, Saagar, they just never give up the dream of some full-scale invasion.
Look at the examples that he cited there. He cited the Afghan war,
right,
and he cited Kosovo, which, by the way, Kosovo is 10 times more Islamically fundamentalist today than it was back in 1990. Also is one of the big reasons that we have problems with Russia, NATO expansion. I could go into it for a long time. There's a lot going on there.
This guy's really something. And he doesn't, the Miami political system is weird, and you were telling me about this, that he doesn't,
he's not actually a real mayor.
In terms of his political power in Miami, he doesn't have a lot. So basically his job is to go and do cable news.
He's a ceremonial mayor. And so, in Miami, apparently, this is how it was explained to me, there's a strong mayor, a city manager. They have all the power. They're the people who do vaccines and stuff. You have ceremonial mayor. So he's a ceremonial mayor of Miami. He doesn't actually have control over Miami-Dade County. That being said, he's pretty popular.
Yeah.
And I don't want to downplay. This is actually a very popular view amongst many Cubans who live in Miami, especially the Cuban Americans who are very politically active.
I think that's the important part, is especially the ones that are most politically active, influential, donate money, etc., have this very, hawkish, hardline view. This guy's wild, though. I watched some other hits that he was doing on Fox News as well. Apparently, he's all over that channel right now. And he was making the flat-out, war on terror argument, too. He's like, Cuba's exporting terrorism, and that's why we need to consider a potential intervention. It's like, what are you doing right now? We literally learn nothing from any of these conflicts, from any of our, 100 years of intervening in these countries and the blowback and the disaster that results, not only for the people of those countries, but for our own people. But I don't want to make this just purely a partisan thing here. You got some Democrats down in Florida who are also pushing Biden to do something. You must act swiftly. We can throw this tear sheet from Politico up on the screen. Democrats warning Biden in Florida not to blow a opportunity. I'm going to read to you a little bit of this. They say this is from the Politico piece, now in Cuba's historic uprisings, Florida Democrats see what many are calling a golden opportunity, a chance for Joe Biden to help bring democracy to the island. Okay, that should make you very nervous. And as a result, attract the Hispanic voters that he hemorrhaged 8 months ago. This is a Mr. Gorbachev tear down this wall opportunity, said State Senator Annette Taddeo, a Democrat from Miami, who represents a district that Trump won. We need to be the beacon of hope. There are people in Cuba protesting, waving the American flag. That has never happened. We need to understand the moment we're living in. We also, and I brought this to you earlier this week, Val Demings, Congresswoman, who's Senate hopeful in Florida, calling on the White House to, quote, act swiftly. Now, they're a little bit less direct than the mayor who we just covered is in calling for intervention. But, what are you actually asking for? What is it you want the Biden administration to do and to move swiftly and to act swiftly? Lay it out. What is it that you actually want them to do?
this is the problem, that I think these people are actually poisoning the discussion. So one thing that I've seen floated, I'm curious for what you think, is restoring internet service for people in Cuba.
DeSantis is calling for that.
Right, and apparently we do have the capability. And I was like, okay, well, that seems reasonable. That being said, how do you decide when to do it and not? So if you have the capability, so then are you gonna pick and choose? This is where it gets dicey, where you're like, okay, well, are you gonna pick and choose which protesters? There's protesters all across the world, so allied governments would not get there, or would we help them shut down internet service? Turkey, which is an allied government, they shut down their internet all the time. Pakistan shuts down their internet whenever there's like blasphemy. So, you know what I mean?
So
it just gets dicey. It's like on the surface, I'm like, okay, I mean, sure, you know, restore internet services seems pretty reasonable. That being said, would there be a proportionate response from the Cuban government? Like, would they see that as like an act of war on them? So I'm like, well, this is, you know, it gets complicated. And I do look at it as something which maybe should be in consideration if that's what we're going to consider acting. But
here's what I would say. First of all, I don't even have freaking internet where I live in the United States of America. So if you're going to give people internet access, how about you make sure the citizens of this nation have internet access if you have that capability and you're so casually ready to use it? That's number one. Number two, this all has to be taken into consideration in the context of our long and bad history with Cuba. Yeah, as DeSantis points out in his, request for them to do this, we have a long history of piping propaganda into that nation, including directly involved with the Bay of Pigs failed invasion attempt. So all of these things, any sort of direct U.S. action with regard to Cuba, it's going to be received incredibly poorly. It's going to look like we're taking those sort of heavy-handed tactics, and with good reason, too, by the way.
Could also be used as an excuse by the Cuban regime to combat them even more. I saw the Chinese would do this a lot. They would say, like, because the Hong Kong protesters, many of the Cuban protesters are, waving American flags as symbols of freedom, but the Hong Kong people would be like, see, they're American agents. That's what the Chinese government would do, and they would go and they would kill them, or they would, throw them in prison. And it's miraculous they've never heard from them again. So I would also be concerned from that view, which is like, if you do restore the internet, and then the people who do use it could be labeled as American agents, they could all be slaughtered, under Cuban law. So, like, that's another area.
Anything that we do with regard to intervention and messing with what's going on with Cuba has potential blowback because of the incredibly horrific, and not just with regards to, trying to remove Castro, trying to assassinate Castro, like, countless times, more times than we even possibly know about, but, installing Batista. And back before it was Castro, the U.S. was, so powerful in Cuba that the U.S. ambassador was the second most important person on the island, sometimes considered the most important person on the island. U.S. business interests, mob running the joint. I mean, so this is a sort of situation where, look, I 100% support the liberation struggles of people. Everyone should be free from repression. They should have freedom of speech, just like we're supposed to have here, which also is, sometimes in doubt in this nation at this point. But for us to get involved directly, other than to lift the sanctions that, again, if you care about the Cuban people, lifting the sanctions that have made life very difficult would be the one thing that we should, act swiftly to do. Because also, as we've discussed before, look, all that the government has to do to cover up from their own failings is point at those sanctions. Look, it's the U.S.'s fault. They have these sanctions on us, and they have some justification for there. So don't give them the excuse if you actually care about supporting the people of Cuba. And by the way, I was looking at some of the polling here. It's a lot different than, I think, the way that Cuban-American opinion is portrayed. It's a lot more, it's not uniformly hardline the way that it's portrayed, but the hardline voices are the ones that are most elevated. They're the ones that are most influential, especially within the Republican Party. In the past year, they polled Cuban Americans in Miami on whether these sanctions should be lifted temporarily during the pandemic, not overall, but temporarily during the pandemic. 57% said yes.
Wow.
So, I mean, because it's horrific. I mean, it's immoral when people are suffering during a pandemic to put these further saying, we're not at war with Cuba. Like, what are we doing with this? And it hasn't worked, by the way. If your thought was like these sanctions, and that has always been the thought, that we're going to put pressure on them and then they're going to overthrow the regime and then it hasn't worked for 60 years. What do you think is going to change and make it different this time around? So I also don't think the opinion is quite as uniform as it sometimes is caricatured in the news media.
That's true. My general opinion on this stuff is if you're going to do it, then you have to be willing to go all the way. What we were talking about with the Afghan girls. You can be, listen, I am 100% with the protesters in Cuba. It's inspirational. People putting your life on the line and all that. It's amazing to watch. It's something that's so incredibly rare. That being said, if you should probably not do something unless you think there's a 100%, a reasonable more than 50% chance of success. Do we really believe that the Castro regime is about to fall? I just don't believe that.
Where has it ever worked that we've installed democracy and it's really gone well, Well,
and it's not even about installation. I'm saying if you're going to let you tip the hand on the scales or whatever, you be pretty damn sure it's going to work. I just don't think that these are probably going to work. It's like with Hong Kong. Frankly, look, I've stood with the people of Hong Kong and the Hong Kong protesters. Hong Kong is a more dystopian place today than ever before. Why? Because the CCP rules it and it's theirs. And there's not much we can do about it. And so outside of being I stand with the people of Hong Kong, and I think that generally that's the tenor of the Biden administration so far, which is, look, we stand with people, like you're saying, peoples of liberation everywhere. We stand with people who are holding the American flag in the streets. God bless you. That being said, actively working to try to overthrow the regime, especially if it fails, is also an embarrassment. Look at Venezuela. They're laughing at us over Guaido, because we can't even do a coup anymore. So I'm just saying, whenever it comes to it, you have to be very dicey.
Yeah.
I've heard from some Cubans who are very upset that we're not fully. And so, listen, once again, you can be very, very, very appreciative and hopeful and inspired by the people who are standing up in the streets, especially when their lives are actually on the line. But it's complicated, and the United States does not necessarily have the responsibility to get involved and then to try and overthrow this government, especially given our long history on the island. I would just ask those people who are upset to consider our own history in Afghanistan and in Iraq and our ability given Venezuela to do what you want them to do. I don't think that's frankly within the capabilities. So that's
there's also a lot of hypocrisy that's been revealed here from, and Glenn's been pointing this out a lot online.
I have a tweet that I can show you.
Yeah, but about, there was this idea of an America first, foreign policy doctrine that's basically look, let's take care of this country and let's not worry so much about the rest of the world, which involved both that, so, non-intervention kind of philosophy, and also let's get us out of Afghanistan, and also an immigration restrictionist view. All of that goes out of the window where Cuba's concerned. It's bring in the refugees, which I support bringing in refugees, by the way. But if we're going to do it, we don't just pick and choose which nations, because of what their what the government ideologically happens to believe, or which political constituencies in the U.S. happen to be very influential. So you have that thrown out the window. And then you also have just in this one instance, we should go in. Yes, we should intervene. Yes, we should have your regime change. It's what happened to the principle that y'all claim to support for the past, 4+ years that seemed to sort of just go out the window?
Look,
but which ties in with the Afghan numbers we were showing you earlier too.
I'll just show you this one, and I was shocked to see this. Let's put this up there.
This is wild.
So this guy, I can't pronounce his name. I think it's Giancarlo Sopo. So Giancarlo, if you ever watch this, I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name. He got into a fight with Glenn Greenwald. I mean, he ran Hispanic outreach for Trump, and he's saying, I would gladly enlist, and so would many other Cuban Americans. So he's very upset with Glenn for talking about American first, and he's accusing him of being a surrogate for Latin American leftists, which is pretty ridiculous, in my opinion. But that's an extremely extreme view of saying that you would enlist in the U.S. military, and so would many other people, in order to invade Cuba. Now, look, I don't want to denigrate him personally, because maybe he's Cuban, maybe he has ties, many of these people can feel very passionately. But once again, the whims of a segment of the population should not be subject to the lives of the United States military and American foreign policy. And I would encourage him and others, try polling it. See how many people want to go and invade Cuba in order to install democracy. It would probably poll at 5%.
Even at the height of the Cold War, this shit wasn't popular.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that's why they tried to hide our involvement in the Bay of Pigs.
No, you're right. Which is even whenever we were facing the nuclear annihilation, people were like, I don't know about this whole Cuba thing, man. So, and that was a different, much more hawkish country. this is pre-Vietnam. So just think about how deeply unpopular and frankly ridiculous of a policy that is. And I think that shows you how out of step a lot of people online who are talking about this. And yeah, I don't even know what to say. I couldn't believe it when I saw that. I would gladly enlist. I was like, oh my God. I mean, you're basically calling for literal bloodshed, in terms on behalf of American soldiers to go in and to change the situation there. I just think that's completely ludicrous. I don't think there's anything America first about that whatsoever.
It's wild to see him with that view and the mayor just openly like, hey, maybe airstrikes. What do you think? Maybe foreign intervention. Maybe, democracy instantly. Maybe regime change. Like, this does not go well, guys. It does not end well for us. It doesn't end well for the country involved. No. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut, our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it. You get to ask us questions, all that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.